All right, I think we are live. Hi, everyone. My name is Jo Anderson. I'm the research director at Faunalytics, and I have the pleasure of being here today to talk to you a bit about a recently completed study that I led. So I'm going to switch it up a little bit today and share my screen so that I can show you some slides. All right. So the study that I am talking about was entitled Going Vegan or Vegetarian. And specifically, this particular conversation today is based on the third report from this study, because it was a big study. This one was focused on barriers and strategies on the path to success. And just while I'm on this initial slide, I want to acknowledge my amazing co-author, Dr. Marina Milievskaya from Carleton University in Ottawa here in Canada. So this study, this report and the subsequent reports was looking at the experiences of people who are new to going vegan or vegetarian. And specifically, we surveyed 222 people in the US and Canada who were newly beginning that journey. And by that, I mean, some of them went vegan or vegetarian overnight and joined the study. Others had been doing it for a short amount of time already. Others were starting, but transitioning slowly toward reducing their meat consumption, reducing their animal product consumption, but all of them had decided that they wanted to be vegetarian or vegan, and that's why they were able to participate in this study. So like I said at the beginning, this was a big study. This slide kind of captures the overall way that it worked. As you can see, each of the boxes is a survey, and people in the study were asked to participate for 6 months or up to 6 months if they continued for that long, which hopefully they would, and they did for the most part, with their vegan or vegetarian journey. So when they first signed up for the study, they did what we called the baseline survey, where they told us all about their demographics, their other characteristics, what goal they were going for, whether it was vegan or vegetarian, and their motivations, and all kinds of things like that. And then once a month for 6 months, we would send them an additional survey, a shorter one, where we asked them, first of all, and importantly, are you still pursuing this goal? And a lot of things about the strategies they were using, barriers they were encountering, and other things that might have been going on along the way. So the previous two reports talk about some of those other things. The one that I'm talking about today, as I mentioned, really focuses on the barriers and strategies aspect. And people who said that they were no longer pursuing their vegan or vegetarian goal were redirected, as it shows, to the quit survey. We didn't call it that to them, but essentially it was the survey that if they said they had given up their diet, they were sent there instead to answer some questions about what happened, why they did that, whether they would consider ever trying again, things like that. So with such a big study, so many surveys and all of that information, there's a lot of different things that we could look at. And as I mentioned, there are 3 reports from this study. They're all shown down at the bottom here, or you can find them on our research page. So the key outcomes for the study, as you might imagine, were around how successful people were on their dietary transitions. We looked at their consumption success, by which I mean how close they got to the goal level of animal product consumption that they wanted to reach, which is an academic-y way of saying how vegan they managed to be or how vegetarian they managed to be. Did they cut out the necessary products in order to do that? Felt success is really just an in-the-head thing of how successful you feel. We asked them to give a percentage of how successful they felt they were in a given month on their dietary journey. And finally, the kind of cut and dried one of whether they told us they had quit or given up their diet or not, we called maintenance or abandonment. And then, as I noted, there were a number of different predictors that we looked at, everything from personal and dietary characteristics to motivation, speciesism, and the focus today, supports barriers and strategies. So you can check out the other earlier reports if you're interested in those first 4. and stick around if you're interested in barriers and strategies. Here is a nice overwhelming slide for you to look at. This is one of the tables from the report, and I've actually pulled out 2 tables from the report to put on screen for this, specifically because they can be kind of overwhelming to look at. So I've also put the table numbers so that you can find it if you're in the report. Table 9 is the one where we looked at the importance or difficulty of different barriers that people were experiencing during their vegan or vegetarian transition. And they're rated in the table, or rather ranked, ordered, in terms of how problematic they were. So at the top, I'm not sure whether you'll be able to see it or not on your screen, but the highest rated barrier, the most difficult one, was perceived healthiness on your diet. So by that, we don't mean their actual health. We don't know their actual health because this was a survey study, but we asked people how healthy they felt. And to the extent that they weren't feeling great on the diet, that was something that predicted not doing as well in terms of getting closer to their goal and a greater likelihood of abandoning it. So that's really important to know. Also important in the orange, there were 2 other predictors that marginally predicted, so somewhat statistically significant, close to statistically significant, but we're a little less confident in their effect. These 2 were the strength of identification with the goal diet, by which I mean, how much do I feel like a vegan? If I've just started going vegan, do I feel like, 10 out of 10, totally vegan, or do I not really think of myself that way? It turns out that it is quite important how much you feel identified with that diet or that lifestyle in order to maintain it and to do well at it. And the third one, second orange, is societal perceptions of the diet. So how do I think other people feel about me taking this journey, going vegan or vegetarian? To the extent that you think other people are negative about it, it makes it harder for you to continue and to do well. There are a number of other barriers as well, but I don't want to be on this slide and this table forever, especially since it is in the report. So I will just suggest that if you want to look at the rest of them, that you go check out table 9. So one of the cool things about a study like this, where we were able to keep talking to the same participants for 6 months, is seeing how things change over time. And just focusing on those top 3 barriers that we identified, you can see that there was reasonably good news. This is over the course of the entire study. You can see that the top line, which is the positive sentiment for each of these variables, goes up for identification and beliefs about society. So, I mean, over time, over 6 months of going vegan, going vegetarian, people tended to feel more identified with that diet, which is great because we know it's good for success. And they tended to start believing that society had more positive beliefs as well. Can't say for that latter one whether something actually changed or they're just more motivated to believe that that's true, but either way, we know it's associated with success. So that is a good thing that it tends to get more positive over time. The first one, unfortunately, the worst of the barriers that we found, was relatively flat over the course of the study. So most people did feel healthy. That's not what I'm trying to say. There weren't a ton of people who didn't feel healthy in this study, but of the ones who did, they tended to continue to feel unhealthy. There didn't seem to be a lot of change over time. But more important than just kind of seeing how things change is seeing how strategies were related to all of this. That was a key thing that we were looking at, and something that I think was really new in this study. There's been quite a bit of previous work looking at barriers and supports, sort of like passive supports that people have around them in their lives, but there hasn't been a lot of work looking at deliberate strategies. And that's important, particularly for us as advocates, because strategies obviously are where we can come in and suggest things or actually provide help with those strategies to people who are having difficulty. So in this study, we looked at 6 different types of strategies. And under those types, there were actually 44 individual ones. So I'm not going to overwhelm the screen with all of them here, but I have the info at the bottom for where you can find the full list of strategies if you'd like to see it. But we had strategies that encompass things from social support, like asking your friends and family to support you, to increasing your ability to pursue the diet, like finding different restaurants or different grocery stores to shop at, cost lowering strategies like identifying cheaper products like tofu as opposed to meat alternatives, strategies that are intended to improve health effects like taking a supplement or talking to a medical professional, strategies to increase motivation, which includes things like watching factory farming videos or learning about social justice reasons for staying vegan or vegetarian, and cravings reduction strategies like avoiding tempting scenarios or trying to get yourself out of a situation where you're experiencing temptation. As you can see, because I've put the table 10 up at the top of the screen again, this is another one that at a glance is a lot. And I think that this is the most useful table in the report. So I hope that you will go take a look at it and dig into it yourself to get recommendations from it. But I'm going to walk through it a little bit right now. So down the left-hand side is the list of barriers that we talked about earlier. So at the top are those 3 biggest ones, feeling unhealthy on your diet, low identification with vegan or vegetarian, and believing that society perceives it negatively. And then the rest of the barriers all the way down. And across the top, we have the 6 strategy types that I just mentioned in the columns. So lower cost, increasing motivation, increasing or improving health effects, and the others. Then there's also colors and icons, so bear with me. The icons are listed in the bottom left, and that's about what kind of success it predicted when we did the analyses. But for the most part, if you want to get a quick overview, you can ignore which specific icon it is and just look at the blue versus the amber. Blue, where the icons are, means that something was helpful, and amber, where there is no icon, means that it wasn't. So it can get a little more specific if you want to know in what way it was helpful. But for the most part, you can kind of read down and see for the first column, cost lowering strategies, which of these barriers did it help with? If it's blue, then it helped. And there is a lot going on here. So just to pull out some of the things that I think are the most important and interesting from this. Overall, the best all-around strategy that we saw, best strategy type that we saw, that is, were those cost reduction ones. And I say it's the best all around because it had an impact on the likelihood of people giving up their diet entirely, which is obviously the worst case scenario. And it had an impact on, as you can see, going down a large number of the barriers. So regardless of which barriers people had, cost reduction strategies tended to be helpful for many of them. For similar reasons, though not quite as broadly helpful, were those motivational strategies. And so there were different ways in there of increasing motivation, but on average, across a lot of people, it seemed like keeping your motivation up was helpful for continuing with the dietary journey and applied regardless of what kind of barrier you had, with some exceptions, but it was helpful across a large range of them. The worst barrier, as I already hinted at earlier, is really that one of feeling unhealthy. So we did find that there were some things that helped with consumption success if you had that. So by that, again, I mean getting closer to the level of animal product consumption that you want to be at. So cutting out meat. Some things were helpful for that. But unfortunately, even the health-specific strategies, which were really meant to help with health issues, didn't help with abandoning the diet, which is the biggest concern that we would have if someone is having this kind of barrier, feeling like it's not making them healthy, that they're going to give it up. And unfortunately, the strategies we looked at have not helped with that. So to me, that suggests we need to do more here to understand in depth what those barriers are and to help people find ways that work for them of overcoming them. It's also worth pointing out that ability barriers are challenging. So again, these are things like having access to the food that you need to pursue this diet and to be able to cook it or to find it at a reasonable cost. And the ability strategies didn't help with that either. So this is another one where we presented strategies that seemed like they might be helpful, but they're all very individual level strategies. They're like, you have to go look for other places to shop, or you can learn more about how to prepare food. But the thing is, for access issues, if you just don't have access to the foods that you need, there's not a lot that we can do with an individual to help them get past that. So I suspect that that's what's going on here, and that what we need to recommend there, as you'll see on my recommendation slide, is to help people with access issues. So that involves talking to higher level people like municipal councilors, legislators, to improve access to vegan food, healthy food that is available at a reasonable distance from people. And the bonus fact that I wanted to include here, because again, this is a lot, is that one thing we found is that regardless of the strategy type, just using more strategies generally related to being more successful. So regardless of what those strategies were, people who just tried more things to help them continue, to keep them motivated, to lower cost, to improve their social supports, just the number alone, just trying a bunch of things, was actually helpful for making them more successful. So if you take nothing else away, that is one to remember, is to just try things to keep you going. And so finally, I just wanted to present a few really broad recommendations, and we do go into a bit more detail in the report itself, but here are the main takeaways I wanted to present. So averages is what studies are based on. The average person tended to benefit from those cost reduction strategies, regardless of their barriers. That's essentially the information that I'm providing. But I also want to really highlight the point that individuals are individuals. And so if you are talking about a campaign, then having that average information is great. You can try and target barriers that the most number of people are going to have with strategies that are the most likely to be useful. But if you are talking to individuals, then find out what their specific barriers are and try and target that with strategies that tend to help with those types of barriers. That's where that last table that I showed you can be helpful for saying, okay, they have these barriers, here are the things that tend to work. And you can also even just use the strategy lists that we use for measurement as just inspiration for some things that they could try. And for the challenging barriers, because we did find some where we have to say the strategies that we looked at didn't help. And that's a problem. It's a problem for those people, not just us. So acknowledging for those people who are experiencing difficulty accessing food, preparing food, or really anything else on the list, any kind of challenging barrier that they're having, it's important to acknowledge and validate that that is a legitimate concern and thing that they're feeling. And while we can help them try and work through that, just dismissing it is never going to be helpful. And finally, the last point, relatedly, for those access issues, we really recommend that if you have the option to do some advocacy along those lines as well, because we can advocate until all the cows come home from the factory farm for people to go vegan. But if they don't have access to the food that they need in order to do that at a reasonable price, then they're just not going to be able to. So we really need to do both kinds of advocacy, both levels of support in order to make the difference that we want to see in the world. And I will stop it there. I'm hoping there might be some questions for me. And the report link, I'm sure Jenna has been sharing in the chat, but you can check out the report at any time. So I've turned off the screen share. And yes, okay, so I'm seeing a first question is, if I'm mentoring new vegans who want support and accountability, what areas should I focus on in my limited sessions with them for a higher chance that they will continue to make animal-friendly choices once the mentorship program ends? That is such a great question. And I feel like I maybe already slightly answered it with the recommendations, but to put a different spin on that, in this kind of context where you're mentoring individuals, you have a chance to get to know them on a deeper level than you do if you're just doing some sort of large scale campaign where you're not talking to people individually. So in this case, what I would suggest is really getting to know what their individual barriers are and having honest conversations with them about where their challenges lie, so that you can try and help them work through those challenges, not impose your own understanding of what strategies would be most useful for them, but present them with some options and help them kind of talk it through, discuss it, and give them the resources that they need so that they can make that choice and continue with their motivation and their efforts longer term. And actually, an unrelated resource to this report, but we recently put out a fact sheet about communicating effectively as a vegan advocate. And it has some tips in there about how to have conversations about these topics, about how to stay motivated and giving examples from your own life of things you've struggled with, stuff like that. So I would definitely recommend checking out that as well. All right. This question is about being a grassroots advocate since college and doing a lot of leafleting and protesting, but I've never done any type of lobbying like you described in your last recommendation, which was the one about improving access to vegan options. Where do I start? That is such a great question. And I just want to say up front, I am not the expert on this either. So what I would really suggest for this kind of thing is turning to groups who do this kind of work and seeing whether there's anything in your area that's already being done along these lines. So that might mean going outside of your usual vegan advocacy or animal rights groups in the area, looking at social justice groups, for instance, looking for food access resources. There may already be people working to improve access in your local area that you could work with, which is usually better than trying to start it on your own. And if not, then I would check out the Food Empowerment Project, who have a lot of general resources about these issues, and in some cases are even able to help if you are in a local area and you need to know more about the access that you have and trying to improve it. So yeah, tier 1 recommendation would be to try and find something local to you that already exists. And then if not, the Food Empowerment Project is a great place to check out. All right. Question 3 is, if I'm trying to help friends or family go veg, I think I'll have a sense of which barriers they might be facing. But if I'm working on public advocacy campaigns where I might not have a chance to get to know individual barriers, what do you recommend? Yeah, great question. So in this case, that's where those averages and the overall study results come in really handy. So you might have a sense from the barriers table, table 9, I believe, of which barriers are most likely to be problematic. And then even beyond that, if you're advocating in a particular sector with a particular group of people, maybe there's something more that you can learn by doing even just some informal interviews with some people from that group before you start, to see if people in this particular local area tend to have particular challenges based on what's available in the area or the cost of food or anything like that. Try and identify barriers that you can, even at a group level. And if not, then you know what types of things from our study are most likely to be challenging and how to try and tackle those with the strategies if they are. The next person was surprised that feeling unhealthy was a big barrier, since so many people seem to share things like having more energy, glowing skin, etc. That's true. How do we talk to people about the right way to go veg without throwing a lot of unfamiliar foods at them? Great question. And I think, first of all, probably acknowledging that there is no one right way to go veg. There are ways that will help you maintain your health, hopefully even improve your health and get that glowing skin. And I am not an expert on that either. But I think that I relate to your surprise of it being a big barrier, not in the analytical sense. We've seen some similar things in other studies, but I think that some people do feel very positive health-wise when they first go vegan, and we see them talking about, weight loss or general overall health, well-being, whatever other things they associate with positive health. But there are others who don't for whatever reason, and I don't know for sure whether they are pursuing it wrong, so to speak, not getting the right nutrition, or if it's just to some extent your body adjusting to a new way of eating. But either way, I think that we saw in an earlier report from this study that people who transition more slowly are still no more likely to abandon the diet than others. So probably what I would suggest is, if people are having these kinds of difficulties, even if you think that it's in their head, which is possible, that you encourage them to continue. But if they need to continue slowly, reducing the meat that they're eating, but retaining some for a while until they adjust, that's probably a better way of keeping them around rather than giving up entirely. All right, I think that is the last question that we had submitted, but one other thing that I wanted to mention and forgot, because it's a question we get in general about studies like this sometimes, was the idea of sample size. And if this is not your cup of tea and you want to dip out at this point, go for it. But so 222 people participated in this study, and that's a smaller number than you're probably used to seeing on a lot of Faunalytics studies. So you might be wondering, or you might not, but you might be wondering whether that's enough people to really get a sense of things. And the answer to that is, for the type of analysis that we're doing here, where we're looking at one thing predicting another thing, so barriers predicting success, barriers and strategies together predicting success, that is a large enough sample. The requirements for seeing whether one thing kind of goes hand in hand with another like that are smaller than they are to see whether is this number that we see in this group of people what we would expect to see in the entire population. So while we can say things about the percentage of people, for instance, who were vegan in the sample versus vegetarian, we can tell you that information, obviously. We have a lot less confidence in that being representative of all vegans and vegetarians in the US, for instance. But for the primary purpose of this study, which was about predicting success in various ways with various things, the sample size that we had is great for that. So I think that is the end of the questions. Thank you if you've stuck with me this long, and I hope that you will check out the report and those two big colorful tables in particular, because I think there's a lot of useful information in there. And thank you for watching.